learn a lot about the Anglo-Saxons from their burials, in particular the grave goods. We learn about the clothes people wore, the objects that they found precious, and the way that they constructed their identities. Now a dig in Lincoln is focusing on Anglo-Saxon death in order to shed light on those past lives. This site is on a farm not far from the Lincolnshire coast, just outside the tiny village of SCREMBY. First discovered by a local metal detectorist, it's a hilltop cemetery containing almost 100 graves dating back to the early Anglo-Saxon period in the 6th century AD. Digging for Britain first visited the site last year, when Dr. Hugh Wilmot and his team from the University of Sheffield were starting to excavate the site, which was threatened with damage from agricultural vehicles. They discovered an extraordinary proportion of high-status burials containing precious and exotic grave goods, like these ivory rings, which may have been imported from Africa.
This site dates from the migration period in the sort of late 5th, early 6th century, and this is a period when you're starting to get Anglo-Saxon migrations appearing into eastern England and then moving into central England after the end of the Roman Empire.
Thankfully, the team continued filming their dig diaries after our visit last season. One piece they later uncovered proved to be incredibly rare.
Oh, beautiful! It's completely different.
A spectacularly well-preserved bronze and enamel bowl. The team have returned this year to complete the dig.
This is the trench we're excavating this summer, and there are burials right the way across it.
They're continuing to find an astonishing array of grave goods, catching their discoveries on their dig diary cameras.
Well, earlier on, we started excavating this burial, and a bit of iron came up, and we weren't sure what it was, but now it's been fully exposed, and it's really rather exciting. It's an Anglo-Saxon sea axe, which is kind of like a dagger, so it's bigger than a knife, but smaller than a sword. So I'm just going to lift the sea axe.
Iron weapons are often found in male Anglo-Saxon graves, perhaps suggesting warrior status.
Round of applause.
It's an important find, as there have been so few intact male burials at this site.
The females are sort of buried on their sides, often in a crouched position, and have to be dug a bit deeper in. The males are buried a bit shallower, lying on their backs and extended, and you don't need a very deep hole for that. You know, farmers don't know they're there, and they often get just totally wiped out when ploughing takes place.
We don't know why men and women were buried at different depths, but it means that many deeper female burials have survived completely intact.
Well, we just started lifting one of the necklaces on one of the females there, and one of the fine beads that's come up is this rock crystal one. It's obviously a naturally occurring mineral, and it's extremely hard, and it's been polished and smoothed into this really super bead that looks like it was made yesterday. And they're, you know, they're not that common a find.
But not all the finds are simply decorative.
Wow, how's it going here? What have we got?
We've kind of got an indication that there might be a girdle hanger around here, but we're not quite sure yet.
Girdle hangers were worn at the waist and often shaped like keys. Scholars believe that they represent an important symbol of female identity, possibly relating to a role as head of a household or even a landowner. Women had comparatively high status in Anglo-Saxon society, with legal rights, including the right to own land and the right to leave their husbands. Midway through the season, the team's dig cameras catch a once-in-a-lifetime find in another female grave.
It's a silver bracelet, it's got sort of incised design on it, and it's right on the surface of the grave, so you know, it's a really terrific find.
It's a really, really special, rare object. This is the first one like this we found here, and there's probably only about less than half a dozen other ones that have been found nationally, and usually they're associated with individuals thought to be really quite high status.
This season has been even more fruitful than last year.
We've done 2 seasons of work now, and I think we've learned pretty much as we're going to.
The quantity of rare finds in this ancient Lincolnshire cemetery suggests it was reserved for the most high-ranking people in this Anglo-Saxon community. Here you've been back at SCREMBY again, and you've had some amazing finds coming out of the cemetery. Some quite characteristic Anglo-Saxon finds, but some unusual ones as well. This astonishing find, I mean, that is absolutely beautiful. Is this an object which has any parallels elsewhere?
Well, this is a super object in its own right,
Yeah,
and it's even more exciting in the context it's in. So it's actually Roman. It probably dates to the 2nd century AD.
Really?
Yeah. It belongs to a group, there's about half a dozen similar vessels to this that are known from Roman Britain.
Yeah.
So it's a really rare object as a Roman vessel.
Yeah.
But then it's found buried 400 years after it's made in an Anglo-Saxon grave.
It was an antique.
Oh, absolutely.
What's it made of? Is it bronze?
Yeah, it's cast in bronze, and then this decoration is actually chased out with a sharp tool.
Right, okay.
And then it's infilled with enamelling. If you imagine that new shiny bronze with colours, you've got red, you've got green, you've got blue.
It would have been it's a gorgeous object now. It would have been absolutely bright and stunning, wouldn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. What have we got here then? What's that extraordinary thing?
Oh, this is really super. This is a little boar's head mount. You can see the tusks and the teeth there, and it's got these little garnet eyes.
So those garnets are looking a bit dull now, but they would have been bright red, wouldn't they?
We're not entirely sure what it is, but one possibility is it's possibly a mount of a helmet.
Right.
There's a bit of an association between the boar imagery and Anglo-Saxon helmets.
That is stunning. Now that brings me to this extraordinary bracelet. Absolutely beautiful. Wow.
Well, this is one of our star finds. It's not often you can find sort of large sort of silver objects in Anglo-Saxon burials. And
Can I pick it up? Is it
Yep.
too fragile?
No, it's remarkably stable. I mean, it's almost as if it's been made yesterday.
Yeah.
And it's a very, very rare object. There's probably about a dozen of them known from cemeteries across the country.
Yeah.
And most of those come from antiquarian excavations, so it's really nice to have one from a modern excavation.
And the ones that are known, are they of a similar style to this?
There are 2 broad styles. One's like this, which are sort of flat strips of silver that are just sort of wrapped around, and tend to be heavier and have a sort of higher content of silver. And then you get another type where they're sort of crinkle cut, sort of thinner and sort of fluted, and they seem to have a sort of distinct regional variation.
And what about this pattern? Is that a kind of known pattern?
It's a really interesting pattern. Again, they tend to be decorated like this with this sort of punched decoration.
Yeah.
But this is the only one that has almost like a sort of stylized beast head or flower head at the end.
Yeah.
And the only other parallel I know of is actually on a piece of gold work from the Staffordshire Hoard. There's a sort of gold strip that has a similar kind of decoration on the end.
And do you think the objects that they're buried with are sort of everyday objects, or are these objects specifically for the grave?
It's difficult to tell that, but I think most of these objects were actually things they were using all the time. So the beads, for instance, are often worn and slightly chipped. Perhaps some of the objects, like the silver bracelet, seem in remarkably good condition, so perhaps they were specifically put in for the burial.
What's your understanding of the cemetery now that you've more fully excavated it?
Well, what's been really interesting is that although it's been quite damaged by ploughing, we've managed to excavate pretty much 100% of the cemetery. We've got about 50 intact burials. That's probably about half of what there would have been originally. So it's one of these small little cemeteries that seems to come into use in the 6th century and then goes out of use by the middle of that century.
What about who they are in terms of their material wealth? Is it unusual, the amount of material wealth that you're seeing in those graves?
This is clearly a community that is very well connected and potentially quite wealthy as well. So they are choosing to bury their dead with a substantial amount of material culture. We tend to see these as small, isolated communities in the early Middle Ages, but actually they were probably part of a much wider network.
Well, they liked nice things, didn't they, quite clearly?
Yes.
Yeah, but at the moment, that is my favourite object of this series of Digging for Britain. It's
Fantastic.
amazing. while invading a country and